According to my sources, it's 3 p.m. Eastern Time and 12 noon on the Pacific Coast. And I want to welcome everybody to today's NMA webinar titled Effective Performance Appraisals. We have two gentlemen whom I know well, and I still let them agree to do the session today.
You'll regret it.
Don, I'll have you go ahead and advance to the next slide since it has your names on it, and I'll speak to it a little bit. Don Hart has been an NMA member for the past 37 years. He's a charter member of the Hanford chapter, now the Mid-Columbia Leadership Development Association. And he served in many chapter, council, and national leadership positions. In 2002, Don was actually our NMA chairman of the board and has been on our board of directors since 1995. So he's seen a lot in that period of time. He's also had a variety of senior leadership positions in the nuclear industry at the Bettis Atomic Power Laboratory and the Hanford site there in Washington. He's active in a lot of community organizations and boards, has a lot of experience with effective performance appraisals. I do know that Don has a BS in industrial management from the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh and has completed his master's in engineering and project management at the University of Pittsburgh. So he's a good old Pennsylvania boy and he's headed for the other side of the country. And his partner in crime today is Joe Esty. I met Joe many years ago, probably my first visit out to the Pacific Northwest, and he was a speaker at one of our leadership development conferences. For nearly 20 years, Joe has assisted organizations as a human performance improvement specialist. Currently, he's the manager of safety engineering and training for ATL, which is Advanced Technologies and Laboratories International. While there, he is basically charged with creating innovative solutions to complex problems in companies that are in high hazard situations, like Lumina Power, Detroit Edison, Capstone Paper, and the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I happen to find out he's been featured as an expert in organizational development and managerial sciences. He's got a lot of DVDs. You'll find Joe on a lot of online training videos. In 2008, his book, The Tomorrow Tapestry, Life Woven on the Fabric of Change, was on Publish America's sixth best-selling book. Say that 3 times, even with your own teeth.
Boy, that's right.
Joe has also been the recipient of 3 national awards from the White House Executive Leadership Council for his work in public outreach and education. And Joe frequently speaks to students, entrepreneurs, and business people across the United States. So as we move out today, a couple of things. Number one, the session is being recorded, so anything you may say in a question or answer can and could be used against you. And secondly, what we're going to do here shortly is Sue Kapler and I are both working the seminar from NMA headquarters this afternoon. And Sue has the big assignment. He's got the mute and unmute button. So we will mute everybody here shortly. But during the presentation, John and Joe have a couple of places where they will be asking us to unmute so that they can take your questions and comments. Now, I've had the pleasure, as I said, of not only knowing these two gentlemen, but I've also reviewed the material. It's about a week too late. We did employee performance discussions last week at NMA, but I've gone through it and gone, oh, I don't think I made any horrendous mistakes. So we're going to have a great time, and I need to shut up and let them take over. So ladies and gentlemen, Joe Esty and Don Hart.
Thanks. Thank you, Steve. Last time I did one of these with a partner, some folks had trouble seeing my partner. So if you have an issue with that, just give us a holler and let us know, or however it is you communicate with Steve, because I guess he takes text messages. I don't know. Joe and I are excited to be doing this particular presentation for you. It is one which Joe had done all of the development work on, and has shared with a number of our contractors out here. And I think one of the groups watching has been lined up by Mary Davenport, and she's been wondering if Joe Esty is still around. So this is always a way you can find out.
That's right.
And so we will just kind of go through this and partner a little bit and stop and take some questions. But I will tell you, just kind of ask if something comes up. So that's where we're at. I'm now going to slide 3, which was okay. So these are kind of the objectives for today, to help you understand the value of focusing on behavior and not character. And that's hard to do with my friend Joe here. One of the things that Steve didn't have in his introduction was Joe and I worked together probably since 1981 or 82, when he was a nuclear operator at one of the plants that I worked at as well. And so we've become fast friends, but it was kind of interesting getting through some of those early years. And so not focusing on his character will be very important. Managing potentially contentious issues. Those of you who have always been through performance appraisals that are number one wouldn't recognize this, but sometimes they do get kind of ugly. And so we'll talk a little bit about tools that you can use and things you can do. We'll talk about avoiding common appraisal pitfalls. We'll start that early in the presentation and finish it late, because so often you inadvertently get yourself into some of these situations. So we'll talk about some of those. We'll also encourage self-appraisal, so that you have a way of staying self-centered in all of these discussions, and know how to have that kind of discussion with your leader as well. And one of our real major points is being able to give positive, soon, and concrete feedback. You don't have to wait for performance appraisal to do that. You do it every day. And then work collaboratively to set goals. So those are our objectives, to give you a little insight on each of those things as we go through the presentation today. Anything to add, Joe?
No, we're going to hopefully give enough examples that'll hit your experiences either at work as the recipient of some of those appraisals, or as a person who has to prepare them in the future to give to other people.
Okay. And so just as a little bit of fun here, I understand people can see us, and we're sitting close to you doing a good friendly appraisal, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. For those of you who don't know, I just thought I'd have a little bit of fun with some of this stuff, because I've probably done everything wrong in an appraisal you can possibly do. So Joe, I'm glad you brought your appraisal form today. Of course, since it's an appraisal, it's going to be a very formal process. And so I will address you as Larry, because I know your first name is Laurent or something like that.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay. And so as I looked that up in French, and it says Larry.
Oh, okay.
I assume your brother's Daryl and Daryl.
That's right.
So I'm glad you brought your performance appraisal. What do you got in there?
Well, I think I've done 5 work. And,
yeah, it looks like there isn't anything written down. You're supposed to bring your written appraisal into me, so that all we have to do is just sign it and I check the rating form. But oh well.
Yeah, well, if I put it together, you may not sign it. So,
yeah. Similarly, so as you know, we need to cover safety. And normally I would have said your safety performance is bad, but you personally knocked our department off the top safety list when you got that paper cut last year and reported it. So
right.
I mean, we want a safe workplace, but the stats got to be there.
I appreciate you being specific.
Yeah.
At least I appreciate that, the honesty.
The other thing is that I would have expected, when I checked with your peers to see how you were doing. I know we don't do 360s, but I do 360s because I can get away with it. And so when I checked with your peers, they didn't have any good things to say about you as a shift manager. And they said you were spending all your time in working on waste management and and environmental stuff and basically doing training work. So how do you expect to make the goals when you're not even working in that area? You know, what's going on here?
Well, that's disheartening because I'm only actually trying to meet your expectations. I can imagine that impacts their expectations. So I just got to apologize for that.
Yeah. Well, a couple of them said to me they didn't think you were the shift manager anymore. So have you changed jobs?
Well, first of all, does this matter in terms of pay or merit increase at all, or is it
absolutely
driving?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. What else you use these for?
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you that too. Does this matter?
Yeah.
Because apparently there's not a lot of material in here that would.
Well, you're supposed. That's what you gave me. You gave me nothing. You know.
So I thought you knew my job and my position better.
Well, I do, but you know, But I'll tell you what. Why don't you just sign it and we'll call it good because I got a meeting coming up here in about 4 minutes. You know, and as you know, you'll be. Despite all these problems, you'll be rated as a 3 because I've been told everybody gets rated as a 3.
As long as that's consistent across the board, I'm happy with it. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Now, obviously, we were having a little fun, and that is a little on the side. And Joe had to ad-lib because he's my friend.
Yeah. That came out of like some appraisal.
But I'm going to the fourth of our slides, which is top 10 things managers should never say at an appraisal. And this is kind of like David Letterman, you know. I got a few minutes to kill before an important meeting. I hope by the time we're done here, you'll understand that you set aside enough time to do it and set your office up or wherever the conference room is you're doing it in. I purposely played this up a little bit, but I didn't know that was your job. How many times has that happened? You know, especially if you get stuck right in your own appraisal. You know,
exactly right.
And of course, so Bill, I meant Bob. I was really going to call Joe John, but that's just not natural. You know, but that happens. You know, and of course. Look this over, and if you agree, sign it. I mean, how many times have you been involved in that sort of thing? And it's you know, supposed to be quick. And of course, Joe tells me this isn't Vegas, so whatever you said in here may not stay in here.
That's right.
You know, which is just obviously not what you intend to do. What do you think about this one, Joe? You know, been a while since we talked.
Yeah, that does not set the stage for an appropriate appraisal process. So, but it's unfortunately an accurate reflection of too many of them.
Yeah.
And this one is said probably more often than other things that are said, especially for first-time people doing appraisals.
Yeah, because you know somebody's going to say, "Well, why didn't I get a 5? Why did I get a 4? Why did I get a 3?" Whatever it is, it's always good to know. By the way, is a 1 high or low, and is a 5 high or low? You know, which kind of grading scheme are you on? But you know, when the person says, "I give you all 5s," you know, if it were up to me, that's not a good thing, and it kind of makes you say, "Well, why didn't you?"
That's right.
You know, listen, I'm not sure what they do with these forms once they're done. So to Joe's point on, does this mean anything? Does it go anywhere? Does it end up, you know? And because sometimes if you ask who's doing that for you, you may get an answer like this, and you say, "Well, come on," you know. And of course, it's before we begin, anything you've done this year worth noting that I may have missed. So what you're really doing is you're kind of telling them, you know, I don't really know what you've been doing and what's important and what and even what the expectations between us are. And lastly, you know, don't sit down. You won't be here long, which is a little different message, but that implies that maybe this really isn't a performance appraisal review. It really is a disciplinary action. So these are funny, right? But they aren't funny. Right. So anything else?
Well, I think they all represent people who have a desire, or maybe they lack the desire to really use this as a feedback process. But whether they have the desire or not, they lack the ability. And the issue is that they just haven't really thought through the process that's going to be effective, because maybe they don't understand the purpose of this in the first place. So it's an inconvenient waste of time. We're going to get in and talk about some personal opinions, but it really has to be part of an overall feedback process to be done well. And for anything to be done well, you have to gain the skills for it.
Right. And they're not easy to come by. It takes a lot of practice. So now, the long arm of the law. You have to watch what you say, because in the times we live in, jobs have occasions to change and that sort of thing. And if you tell somebody that the reason you're going to a new assignment that's of a lesser nature or what have you, because of performance issues, if they haven't been appropriately documented, you really set yourself up for a real problem. And hopefully you don't wind up in the courts, but there are more and more of these kind of wrongful discharge type suits coming up. See, I'm confused. No, wait, maybe I'm not confused.
That's right.
You know? So it's
particularly in relation to any kind of disciplinary action or progressive reviews on people's performance. If all they've ever heard is things have gone well, you're meeting or exceeding expectations, and then out of nowhere, they're suddenly not meeting them. They were never given an opportunity to understand what they weren't doing well in relation to the expectations in order to improve.
right.
And that's unfair.
So, now, we included this because it's kind of fundamental to performance appraisals and getting work done and getting it done the way you want. I hope you all can see that picture of what it is, because the work as imagined was to go change a light bulb, and I'm sure you've all heard the joke about how many workers does it take to change a light bulb, and it kind of depends on where it's at. But the work as imagined was that the light would be changed, it would be done safely, and there would be no risk of accidents, no hazards uncontrolled. I'm almost sure of that.
That's right.
So the work was planned to do this at an elevated level, and you can see that the work as performed is being handled differently, probably to get it done because somebody said that light's got to be changed today. And so what you have is you have a management gap that results between work as imagined, work that's planned, and then how you go do it out in the field. And sometimes that's just a communication issue, but oftentimes it's not by setting the expectations in a way that both parties understand them.
And you've got a management gap within an organization when people are surprised by what they're learning through the appraisal the first time.
Yeah.
So it indicates that there was work being imagined and planned by the manager, and in their head they had an image, and the work is executed in the field was different than an image. And unfortunately, people wait until the annual appraisal to bring that up. And what reduces that gap is the constant, soon, and concrete feedback over the course of time rather than at one period in time.
Right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what's the impact of poorly performed appraisals. And almost all of us have had the opportunity to be through one of these, and so morale suffers. People have no faith or interest in process. This one's a good one. People focus on results, outcomes, regardless of the expectations for how work should be performed. When the senior management says we do work safely, or safety is our most important value, you need to believe they mean that, but it doesn't flow down that way because it's easier to get your arms around the outcomes, necessarily the processes that control things. So it's when you just get focused on results and not expectations for how the work is to be done, you kind of got trouble brewing, particularly when you get into a performance appraisal. People believe no news is good news. when I first started out in the nuclear business, my boss told me that if you never hear from me, you're doing a good job. And so when I got maybe 15 years into my career, and by then I was out at Hanford, and people said, "You never tell us anything," and that was the learned skill I had to then unlearn.
Right.
It was very difficult,
Sure.
but there are a lot of managers who believe that, mainly because if you share news, sometimes it isn't always good, and that's very difficult. And some people have a hard time saying, "Hey, you're doing a good job." As dialogue goes down, your legal risks increase, because then work is not being done how you want it to be done, and accidents happen, whether they be personnel or spills or shutdowns in equipment or what have you. So you got any other insights on this kind of point, Joe, or
Yeah, I think that's hitting on all cylinders.
Okay. And then workers in general believe managers use subjective, biased perspectives to determine who gets favored and who gets nailed. And if that happens when you have a poorly performed appraisal or one which is inadequate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of this produces two things. First of all, I don't know many managers, sure Don hasn't met many, who ever got into the craft and profession of management in order to write appraisals. That was not at the top three things, the reason that drove them into becoming a manager. So it's a difficult process because it entails a lot of different skills. On the same token, there's almost all employees didn't get into a posture of ever wanting to have appraisals, because they don't see it as anything but a dead-end process, a meaningless process, as verified by some of the points we just made.
Yeah. Okay. I think. Oh, Joe just pointed out I forgot that one. And so, Sue, if you could unmute folks, I'd be kind of curious if the folks out there had seen other impacts of inadequate. Where you're from, and give us a shout out on what you think in terms of the results of poorly performed or inadequate appraisals, or any of the other stuff we've talked about.
This is Avis. I don't have any others, but regarding legal risk, I actually had a situation where an employee had been given good appraisals from her managers. Later, it turns out just to get rid of her. She got to me, and what she got from me was honest appraisals with lots of opportunities to improve performance. So when she was eventually let go by the company, she took the case to court.
That's great.
And the only reason she didn't prevail in court was because I had done all the right things and documented everything. But she'd been with the company 27 years before she landed in my department.
Well,
so I do believe in honest appraisals. I do believe in constant communication. And I'm not afraid to tell anybody they did a good job.
Yeah, that's
You
great.
always praise in public and criticize in private.
there you go. Anybody else?
Thanks, Dave.
This is the city of San Diego, and I think another impact is that you may overlook highly talented employees, and that they won't get the opportunity to exhibit their skills and really increase their potential in the company.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that's really good, and that's really true. You know, the idea, of course, is to develop people, not discourage them.
Right.
Right. Absolutely.
That's
Okay.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, please mute us back up, Sue, and we'll move on to slide 8. Paper copies and don't necessarily would know where we're at without a screen. So what really hinders the appraiser? Okay. Joe kind of touched on some of them. One's time. An appraisal takes time to write, takes time to do a little bit of research to make sure you've got the correct job description, to make sure you've got last year's goals and objectives that you agreed to, assessed where they're at, and then to actually do it. And so this is not a trivial pursuit, but it's got big paybacks. But time is always a problem for all of us in doing our jobs and getting our work done on time. An interesting one is writer's block or illiteracy. And this doesn't necessarily mean that people haven't learned how to write complete sentences or what have you. It's how do they think to say something, maybe something they're not used to saying, and to put it in writing. In some cases, and I'm sure this has never happened to anybody, the person you're working for got to where they are because they are very technically good, and but they've never really had the training and experience in the administrative side of things. And so they're really not quite sure, how do I say what I got to say? Because I'm used to talking in engineering or scientific language, and so that kind of thing can be a real problem. Or they talk that way, and the person they're talking to doesn't understand what is being said, either written or otherwise. Simple things like, and I've heard this over the years about, my form is really too hard to use, or it's too simple to use, or what's the process? Who reviews this before I get it? Those kinds of things. So the process used can be difficult, or it can be straightforward as well. And then, of course, there are just a lot of other demands, not just on time, but on other resources and that sort of thing. The other thing that can hinder appraisals is biases. And I told Joe, since I didn't have any, why I wasn't quite sure how to discuss these. So I think Joe's going to handle the difficult problems here for me.
Even if you manage the resources and have the skills necessary that Don just talked to, you have all the time in the world, you have the right form, you've got a great process, and you don't suffer from any type of literacy issues, you're still going to suffer from what all of us do, and that's bias. And bias ekes its way into the performance appraisal in a couple of different ways. There's a halo effect that some of you know as somebody who always has a halo above their head and they can't do anything wrong from our perspective. So they may have done things that didn't meet the expectation, but in your eyes, everything they do is beyond the expectation because they constantly walk around with a halo. There's the opposite of that, and that's the person in the organization who is seen with horns. And they got it wrong once, and as far as you're concerned, they're going to get it wrong every time they go out to do it. So instead of disassociating a point-in-time error or mistake they made, we see it as a pattern or a character issue. And we'll give them a halo or we'll give them a horns. That'll greatly influence the way we approach the appraisal. In addition, a couple other biases, Don, if you hit that,
okay,
be the primacy bias. And that means whatever I primarily believe to be true about somebody based on the first thing I hear about them, I'm probably going to carry that story in my head the rest of the time that I know them. So if I'm introduced to somebody in the organization and the person that is introducing them to me tells me they're a very safety conscious individual, they always think before they act, the more often I hear that and first getting to know them, the more it'll form a bias in my head. Other people who might have a difference of opinion with specific examples will be discounted because I'm going to believe what I primarily learned first about that person and discount the rest of the information. So that'll form a bias. Proximity and availability enter into how close I am in location and geography to the person that I am appraising. They could be a telecommuter. I work with companies that have 25 to 50% of their folks working from home. They are either at an advantage or a disadvantage from the person who works right next to the office with me, because I either see them so much or they don't see them often enough. And proximity alone will kind of shape my belief about what they're doing, how they're doing what they're doing and the benefit of it for the organization. Availability bias usually enters in when it's coming close to the deadline for the appraisal, and I begin to gather the most immediate facts or recent situations about that person. So instead of keeping an adequate log or an adequate memory about what the person's performance was against the objectives and the expectations, I only remember what they did 2 weeks ago. And if it was well done, they'll appreciate the appraisal. If it wasn't so well done, they won't appreciate the appraisal. So proximity and availability, if we don't guard against it, will enter in as a bias. And Don, you've had experience just like I have with this one, forced distribution models.
Yeah.
And there are organizations for a variety of reasons who believe if you have 10 people under your employ, then 2 of them are folks who just aren't doing enough. 2 of them are stellar performers, and the other 6 are somewhere in the middle, whatever that forced distribution model is. Well, if you operate according to a forced distribution model, and it's usually in relation to merit pay or compensation tied to an appraisal process, then it begins to shape what you actually wanted to say versus what you're going to say about the individual on the appraisal. It won't be an honest appraisal, it'll be a shaped appraisal. That's the downside of one of those models.
So, we've talked about this. Ava's talked about it. The real need for day-to-day workplace communication about what's going on. The performance appraisal cannot replace that in any way. And in fact, if that happens, when you get your appraisal, you'll be surprised. And there isn't anything worse than surprise when somebody's evaluating you. And because if you'd have known sooner, you'd have corrected it sooner. Yeah. So you can't overemphasize that the day-to-day workplace communication is really important. And performance appraisals are then better, frankly, and more accurate when you're doing this kind of thing, because you don't have the biases that we just talked about to the degree that we talked about them, because you know what's going on in your workforce. And this is the higher you get in the organization, when things start getting layered, this gets a little bit more complicated than if you're running a 3 or 4 person crew. But that just means it's complicated. You just figure out, are you going to find out what people are doing and know what they're doing through your plan of the day meeting or whatever your tool might be. But being engaged with people doing what you want them to do every day is really, really important.
Charles S. Jacobs, who wrote the book referenced in our slides at the end, Management Rewired, Why Feedback Usually Doesn't Work and What Managers Don't Know About It, illustrates it this way. As a neuroscientist, he looks at what's going on inside the human head. And with the technology that's available to him, he can tell you that there are 2 times in every human being's life that the entire regions of your brains light up. And there are 2 times when they go completely dead. And the 2 times they light up is just before our expiration, before we pass, because as the old saying goes, your life passes before your eyes. For some reason, cognitively and from a neuroscience perspective, that actually happens. Everything lights up. The other time is when somebody tells you you did something well or you need to improve in something you've done with a concrete example, because your memory tied to your emotions, tied to the cognitive functions you have, all lighten up to figure out what it is you need to do, what you did, and how it paid off. The 2 times that the brain goes silent is upon expiration and at annual performance appraisals. And he brings that up typically because when they've measured it, there's silence in the head. Number 1, there are no surprises, so there's nothing to pay attention to. Number 2, people don't think, unfortunately, that the appraisal at that point in time matters, because if something did matter, you would have told me before I got there. So I think, though he may have said it in jest, I think there's a hint of reality to it.
Okay. So having said all of that, and that the appraisal process is difficult and sometimes unpleasant and all those sorts of things, I think you really need to kind of take a look at what is the purpose of the appraisal as it is structured, and why do we keep doing this to ourselves? Because it's to properly and continually motivate people and develop their performance as their competencies improve. Like the one lady said earlier, your skills don't change much. You don't contribute more if you have a poor performance appraisal. You kind of say, yeah, whatever. Whereas if you have one that's good, you continue to work on your competencies for the company. So important things in the appraisal is to have people agree with what's expected of them. And this is a two-way street. If you think about what a manager or a leader does for the folks that they're involved with leading, they've got some things to do to make sure those people are successful too, as well as the individual being in control of meeting an expectation. So being very clear and agreeing on what they are is very important. Also true in terms of discussing how work has been going. And then identifying strengths and weaknesses. I'll let Joe comment on this too, but my most success with performance appraisals and with leading people, getting them to do what needed to be done, came when I focused on what their strengths were. Obviously, if there is a weakness that is really being a fatal weakness, you have to help people through that and take care of it. But most of us identify strengths and weaknesses and say, well, we don't need to do anything with the strengths, so we'll just concentrate on the weaknesses. And what you see is a lack of progress forward. Mm-hmm. Those of you who were at the national conference a couple years ago, or have read the whole variety of books on strengths and how you measure them, the tests you take, so it not only says what kind of person you are, like in the typical things we've done, but where are your strengths and how do you make use of them? We'll find out that this whole approach is really important, but identifying strengths and weaknesses so that folks get assigned to the work they can do well.
And I think what's really important to note is that, and this is predicated throughout the talk, but that is that the appraisal process is a dialogue, not a monologue. This
Right.
isn't just reading out the things that you've done or that they've done and then assigning some kind of rank to it. This is really a dialogue or a conversation that may change the appraisal as you go through it. And one of the equations that in my experience managers might get wrong most often is when as part of the dialogue, they will ask the person they're appraising at that point in time to talk about their strengths, and then the manager points out their weaknesses. See, that feels natural, but it's incorrect. What you really have to do to kind of get the conversation you need is you ask them, you point out their strengths because you ought to know enough about them to understand
Mm-hmm.
how to communicate that, and have them point out where they need to grow and where their vulnerabilities are. If we spend our time with them trying to share their strengths, which is what a lot of managers start with, hey, tell me what you did well. Number one, there's some fabrication that goes on, because you're putting them on the spot. Not everybody is comfortable talking about how confident they are in their strengths. A lot of people are comfortable talking about where they see need and room to grow. So that's got to be kind of a dialogue tool. You share your weaknesses with me, and let me help you point out your strengths.
Okay, give people praise and constructive criticism. There's an art to this, frankly, but it's when you get through practice, don't hesitate to praise people, because when they've done some actual thing that's truth, fact, real, and makes a big difference, because that gives them this light going on response that Joe talked about. None of this is manipulative. This is a discussion, and the constructive criticism can be sometimes very, very, kind of difficult to talk about. So you just have to think about how you're doing it, and what it is you're talking about. Behavior versus character, those kinds of things. Joe, you want to?
Yeah, every once in a while, when you're having a dialogue with a person about what they're doing well, what needs to be done on behalf of the organization to help them do other things well, you might find out there's some organizational interface issues that haven't come up. And maybe they're not seeking help from the right people at the right time. Maybe there's a mentor within the organization that could help groom them in their development. It's a ripe opportunity while you're having this conversation to find out who they most frequently relate to and who they haven't had a chance to get to relate to the benefit of the organization. And it opens up avenues for networks that are going to develop now, so when they need them later on, they'll be there.
And then the other thing, the other reason you do the appraisal is making sure you understand what support they need. Oftentimes that does take the form of development and training, but sometimes it can be, a different kind of resource need, which would make a difference in how they're able to support you on time with higher quality, whether that's a software package or something else.
That's right.
Once again, at least I tried to always tell my folks that I'm, as their manager or as their leader, it was my job to move rocks out of their way. And many times those rocks are things like getting them the right kind of training because the training budget's too small, and things like that. And you just go to work on them. So when for me, and this is Joe's slide, obviously most of the presentation is one which he's developed, but for me, the real turning point as a manager and a leader was when I tumbled to this that's on chart 11 here, which was you become a world-class problem solver and cultural change agent when your folks when managers stop thinking about what they want from their employees and begin to ask what they want for their employees. And because you can't always give people what they want, but boy, you can zero in on what's the thing that's going to make the big difference. And it's a different way of thinking about it than telling people very specifically, this is the deliverable I got and I'll go to it, have at it. And so then you're not really addressing different ways to solve the problem or to cause a change in the culture which you have around you.
Right.
So, to me, if I had to pick out one slide in this whole thing, to me, this is the one which makes the big difference.
Especially, yeah.
So, performance discussions provide an opportunity to, and we'll talk about several things, but remember, performance appraisals aren't a test and they're not a competition. And people are going to say, well, yeah, they are, because if you give me a wrong appraisal, then I'm going to lose out money and whatever to somebody else. There's some truth in that, but the appraisal discussion itself and your interaction with your leader should not be. And if you're the leader, you definitely got to make sure that it's not, a test of how much they know about what they did or what you think is right or wrong, or a competition with you or with the people that they work with. So that discussion includes all these things. And so many times, if you're the leader, it means you need to sit back and do some listening and encourage discussion. And, and sometimes you got to use good listening skills to make it happen. But it's an opportunity for people to air concerns as much as it is for the leader to air concerns about some things which might be going on in the organization, some things which they're not seeing, and gives them a chance to talk about their careers. Learning opportunities happen everywhere at the individual level. A variety of organizations learning how it's better for them to work with others. The time to discuss those is during the appraisal process, and of course, setting goals and reinforcing organizational values. The values cannot be understated here. because they have to drive what your goals are and how it is that you set them. So I'd be kind of curious to know if some of you find a different opportunity for what goes on in a performance discussion, or what you'd like to see go on in a performance discussion. So, Sue, if you could unmute us, we'll see what the audience has to say here.
Oh, I'd like to change my blood circulation.
Yeah. Let's make sure we are all muted up. If you're, so you can talk to us. Anything? Okay. With that, we will move on, because the next slide is a kind of a favorite of mine in terms of appraised against what. You appraise against what, not who. And for example, here you see two highly skilled, and of course you can't compare them. And surely they do things which are the same.
Yeah, like practice and have a routine.
Yeah.
But asking the question, who's the better athlete, an Olympic skier or an Olympic soccer player, doesn't make any sense. They aren't in the same game. They don't play it the same way, and they don't develop the same skills based on that. So you couldn't determine who the better athlete was, because that would be an unfair comparison.
And so what do? You appraise performance based upon expectations. And so that's kind of what keeps you from getting apples, oranges, and Chevrolets all mixed up and what it is you're looking at. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the appraisal process itself, some ground rules, and then kind of see where that takes us in terms of. There we go. Oops.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I'm looking over Joe's shoulder to see what I have coming. Thorough preparation. It's the key to a productive outcome. Joe, you want to kind of hit some of these key points?
Yeah, I think Ava's kind of said it earlier, but you don't want to suffer from the availability bias, meaning, hey, I need to think about what's happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks with this individual and highlight those accomplishments or those things they need to work on. If you're going to do a fair appraisal that is part of the feedback process overall, you need to look at the whole performance for the period of time you're reviewing, which means you're going to take a look at things they did 8 months ago in the same light as things they did 8 hours ago. And that'll keep you from that availability bias. And then that means you're probably going to have to make notes about past performance, particularly if they are a project-driven individual, where what gets done doesn't always get measured between the results. So they spent an enormous amount of time getting something, but the result was the form they produced or a report they produced. Well, there's a lot that may have gone into that. And so you're not just speaking about the thing that was done well. You have to know enough process to come up with specific examples to communicate how they did those things well. And then finally, we got to keep in mind that the overall goals are to build confidence, and to gain a contribution, which comes to the agreement on the expectations in the past as well as those that you're building now in the future. The key word here is to look for areas of competency, which means building skills, rather than just slogans that'll try and motivate them to do better. We know research has shown us that when somebody is not meeting an expectation, we normally look at their motivation. They must not care. They're disinterested. When the reality is that many times it's about ability issues or resource issues. They would care if they knew what caring looked like, and they would be motivated if there weren't so many obstacles in their way. And the way you get rid of obstacles is to build greater confidence and skills to understand how to overcome those obstacles.
Okay, so planning for the appraisal itself. These are some things to do, some very specific details that are very important as you go through it. You know, define the purpose as you do your planning and get ready to do the appraisal itself. It, as this says, it's one of the important ways to grow and learn as an organization, not just as a person. Set a beginning and end time, but respect their need to share more. You know, I don't know how your leaders or you as a leader do it, but I came to expect that an appraisal that was pretty comprehensive and yet with no surprises was probably going to take about an hour. I mean, the actual appraisal itself, there may be actions come out of it or what have you, but depending on what you have to talk about, I mean, if there's been an expectation that hasn't been met, then you may, you know, as your time is kind of ramping down, you may have to set a time to kind of get back together. And I would urge you to do that before the person leaves, so that you have a time certain when you're going to finish and they can come back, as opposed to just trying to catch it on the fly. Clarify the scope of the appraisal, the time frame. You know, I've walked in and sometimes I wondered if it was 3 months or if it was a 15-month appraisal, because it was hardly ever a year. There was always some change coming along that drove it to be different. What jobs were involved? Either specific jobs, as in positions, or jobs, as in things you did. You know, activities, projects, those kinds of things. But be very clear about that as you go in, because the other person, if they have not seen this, or if they've made a little different contribution to you, or that sort of thing, if this is where the first time they've seen it, they need to know which of these kind of factors you're dealing with and what are they, so that they can get their head screwed on to be on the same page that you're on. That's the important part. And then concrete examples of specific performance accomplishments is really good and very positive way to do with it. And so, what can you tell us about generalities and personalities?
Well, you know, generalities normally stated at an appraisal are the ones that I can't do anything with. So when you say, you know, we don't feel that you're as safe as you could be, we don't think that you think through your actions before you commit to them. Give me a couple of very specific, concrete examples of when that happened, so I can do something about it. And personalities are, somebody might say, you know, you're a bit of a wallflower, you kind of hang back, it doesn't look like you're actively engaged in the group. Well, again, there's not much they can do about that if that's their personality. People are introverted or extroverted, and they handle crowds and people differently. So what about hanging back is affecting our process? What about dominating the group in your conversations is affecting the process? So instead of just saying you tend to take over, well, that's a personality. They tend to take over. How does it affect the overall process? Does it keep people from being actively engaged? Does it help promote people to be engaged? You got to think in terms of that. What are the generalities and personalities specifically doing with a concrete example?
Okay. Ground rules. You've heard it. No surprises. Occasionally that happens, by the way, and so you just kind of have to discuss it if it should come up. But you know, your object and your target is no surprises. Remember, it's not a disciplinary meeting. Just kind of remember that, because you don't want surprises, and this is not about somebody walking in and walking out without a job or with time off. Or, I mean, that's a whole different process. It's handled differently. If they've been through that process, there may be some impact on meeting expectations and that sort of thing. But this is not the time that you find out that you've got some disciplinary issue to deal with, even if it's something fairly serious. This is not the place for it.
Right. I think basically just review what the numbers mean to them, as Don said earlier. If 5's a good thing, 1's a good thing, they got to know what that means in the spectrum of the overall effort.
the question that, you know, you always want to have high performers. And I mean, that just seems to be, you know, the way we're driven. And so the question oftentimes will be, well, you gave me a 4. What does it take to get to be a 5? And sometimes specifically that's very hard to answer on the spot.
Right.
And so you talk about what your standards are and that sort of thing. So you need to have some feel for what those standards are before you go in. And then basically last ground rule: stay away from character assessments. Focus on technical issues and performance criteria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which takes us to the
So,
next one.
yeah, the next one, and you see my friend Joe just loves this slide.
That's right.
So
Well, I think it's a turning point in management.
yeah.
Where we have been raised by one of two types of parents, and as managers, we become one of two types of managers. And when we did not meet the expectation, we heard one of two things. Either, well, I thought you were better than that, you should have tried harder, which comes from a fixed mindset, which means you're about as good as you're ever going to get, and errors are always a result of character flaws and motivational issues. You didn't do well because you didn't care to do well. The problem with that is I can't do much with that. Whereas a growth mindset would say, hey, you didn't do as well if you were a kid on that math test as you thought. Let's go through your process and studying for the test to see where you could have done better. Well, now you got something to work on. So we do it with kids and we do it with employees. A growth mindset is one in which it leads to learning about what the organization is doing or helping an individual do and looking for failure in the system, not just in the individual. A fixed mindset actually looks to avoid risk. You know, in safety, we try to get people to be risk competent. We don't want them to be risk adverse. But the way we talk to them is going to drive one or the other behavior. So in gaining competency, it's not about avoiding the things you're not good at and never taking a risk. Mm-hmm. It's about challenging them through stretch goals to get better at something. But they'll only do that if your mindset as a mentor is to develop them rather than to reward them for what they're already doing. And then finally, a growth mindset improves a condition by identifying and remediating a step or an issue, increases their ability. And managers who are in a fixed mindset, just like parents, use slogans. Should have tried harder. I thought you were better. You know, try again. So we want to avoid those things, and we want to go with the technical issues and the performance deficiencies that we can do something with.
Yeah, I had a thought on this one, but I just kind of lost it.
Come back.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. So the appraisal process ground. Whoops.
Yeah, we'll go all the way down to that.
You know, these we've talked about. Okay, and the importance of always using concrete examples, referring to patterns of behavior, not individual, isolated, single events, errors, and focusing on that table of growth in the way in the way you achieve it. Those are the key things. And for those of you who thought slides 16 and 18 were the same,
they were.
They sort of were,
except for one bullet.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to 19, encouraging self-appraisal. You know, you can start the discussion with an appraisal with how do you think you're performing in relation to the expectations which you've had set. And you know, I used to hate it when my boss would say, okay, go through and do your own appraisal. I never thought that was quite right, because then he turned around and used it
against me.
The only thing he used. And I always found that I tended to rate myself not where I wanted to be, which meant I rated myself lower. And frankly, you know, 90% of the people do that, and their managers may have rated them higher. So don't necessarily get into the rating, but use open-ended questions. Who, what, where, how, relational kind of questions, so that they're not yes or no. You know, did you get your production goals? Well, you know, you know, it's You know, how did you go about doing that? Because one of the things you'll do is you'll probably learn something about something that's going really well in the organization. How to create an atmosphere of trust and respect. Allow ample time. Show your team member that you take this meeting seriously. And I want to emphasize the term team member there, because whether you are the leader or called a manager, it's what you do as a team and together with all of your people that's going to make the difference. And so allow ample time, recognize that it really is a serious commitment. And when people see that you believe that it's serious and that you're very respectful, they take it the same way. Close the door to ensure privacy. In some cases, if you happen to be in one of the organizations that has a lot of cubicle work, that means you got to find a conference room. You know, do it. You know, you need to have an uninterrupted place for discussion, and generally speaking, where it won't be overheard, because then people kind of get leery about what they say. And you want them to tell you the truth, and you want to know what it is, straight up. Don't take phone calls or allow interruptions. And that sometimes can feel like it's tough because you're expecting something from a customer, what have you. You're expecting something from your boss. Frankly, you know, you just either leave your phone in your office if you go to a conference room, or turn it off, or just kind of click it so that people know you're not taking the phone calls. And if somebody asks, you just say, hey, I was in the middle of a performance appraisal and it was pretty important. And then I was going to have some fun with this part of it, but it couldn't have been seen on any of the screens. But basically, you want to not be on one side of the desk or at one length of the table and the individual at the other end of the table. You want to be able to sit and have a conversation with them, you know, much as you would with one of your friends, you know, in the office. You know, so you want to be facing them. You want them to see you and how you're reacting, and get your body language, which is just as important as seeing and hearing what you say. Any other pointers, Joe?
No, that's covering.
Okay. All right, you can deal with ratings that are never
just kind of in concluding, to look back over the process as you're putting the performance appraisal together, the ratings, because we're human beings and we all suffer from biases, the best we can do is acknowledge them and try to plan for them. We're never going to be truly objective and neutral, but they have to be fair. And so when you assess appraisal or performance, you want to be fair. There are 5 basic questions to keep in mind. Am I basing this decision on business-related criteria? Or once again, is it a character assassination or a summation of what we believe the character is like? But we have to base it on business-related criteria. Am I treating people consistently? Am I following the organizational policy? Am I communicating accurately and thoroughly? Do they understand how they're being appraised and what these expectations mean from my perspective? And should I consult with HR or an expert if I'm in doubt in any of these things? So those are some key questions to keep in mind in regards to the fairness factor.
You might be surprised if you're writing one of these things for somebody and you're stuck on something, the kind of help you're actually going to get from one of your HR people.
Right.
You know, because a lot of people avoid them like the plague.
They can be a real resource.
But, you know, particularly if they've come out of, you know, somewhere else in the company and then been and moved into HR, you know, the tricks of the trade sometimes come along with them, and that's what they can share with you. Right. So, positive feedback, be sincere. Make sure it's true. If in fact you're trying to celebrate something and build it up, when it's not real important, the person on the other end knows, okay? And they will see that as a lack of sincerity and trust. Be specific, in terms of the behavior. Talk details. Mention how it positively impacted you in the organization. Make it personal. Use the I word a lot to describe how you feel and how you're reacting to what's being said. You know, I observed this, and
I feel this way.
Yeah, or I feel this way, and that gets you a long distance. And be open to detail. Let them tell you more. You'd be surprised what you'll learn if you just close your mouth. I think Abe Lincoln kind of said it best. If you don't have anything good to say, keep your mouth shut and listen. You'll learn things. The other pointer I would add here, this is the thing that I was having a little trouble drawing out a few minutes ago, was in another set of classes which I've been involved with in terms of talking about performance and helping people get better. One of the things that you can do is you in fact can observe what happened and what went on, and just say, next time, add a little of this or try this. But it's next time do it. Don't continue to concentrate on the things that might have gone wrong in a particular evolution. Just simply say, next time, try this and see how it works. And what people will leave there with is, gee, I didn't get put down and I didn't get criticized, and I was actually suggested to do something next time that I could really do something with. And so, that's sort of a little different summary of what we've had, but I have tried to use that, as my wife Lisa would tell you, in the last couple of years, and it really works. Not with her, by the way, but it really works. And she's not here to defend herself. Right. So but it is a habit to get into, and it's very hard because you're inclined to say, well, this one okay, but don't say but. Just say, this one okay. Next time, try this. Okay. So, in summary, Joe, why don't you kind of take us through this?
Okay, remember it's a dialogue, not a monologue, and therefore you want to plan for the appraisal time, setting, expectations, and outcomes. Keeping those four things in mind as you build the framework for the written appraisal. You want them to start with their own self-appraisal. Can you tell me a little bit about how you accomplished this task? We know that you did well on this project. Let them open up with some self-appraisal. You want to continue with open-ended questions by asking, how did that go? What did that mean? Who were you working with? You want to review current objectives and set new ones, get agreement. You also want to evaluate the performance always along the way, and not the character or the personalities. If our management minds would default to always looking at the issues they might be having as ability issues rather than motivational issues, we're going to be right most of the time. And that will help set the stage. Want to, once again, be specific about using examples. And then finally, determine what you're going to do with this information. As the folks who wrote the book, The Influencers, How to Change, The Power to Change Anything, said, you always want to finish a conversation with a checkup or a check back. Somebody needs to close the loop. So if it's something that they need to do in order to improve, we're going to check up with them, and then we're going to talk about a date, as Don mentioned earlier. If they need to check back with us to see where we're at on an issue they brought up, then that's their assignment. But always close that conversation with who's doing the checking. Am I checking up with you, or are you checking back with me?
One of the things I found very helpful along these lines was to sit down on a 4 to 6 week basis with somebody besides the daily involvement and say, okay, we said we were going to do these things. Where are we at? Just to make sure, because we all get so busy and so tied up with day-to-day work that we forget to do that. And that means you got to schedule it. You got to get it done. And if you got it doesn't sound like much, but if you got a group of 10 people you're working with, that turns into a very positive thing. But on the other hand, it does take some time to do it. It's part of what you do as a manager instead of a doer.
Right. So. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So at this point in time, didn't want to forget this part. These are 4 key references that were used as part of the developmental material for this. There's some here which are really interesting. Joe has kind of tweaked me here on the Management Rewired in terms of what people know neurologically and what they're learning, because you'd be fascinated with that kind of thing. At least I would. Mm-hmm. But the others, are all good references that will help you in your performance. And the handbook can really help you because it kind of tells you a lot more of the how-tos. Exactly. So those are there for your reading pleasure, and to get them. If you notice, we didn't have any books up there by Esty.
Yeah. So I didn't write on the top of it.
Yeah. Anyway, so I would like to have Sue, if you're still there, to open the floor up if folks have concluding questions or comments for us. Yeah, I would like to know who you are and where you're from. So, anybody?
We kept trying, but. Hey, Don, this is Barry from Bangor.
Oh, hi.
Oh, good. It was a great presentation. We had a small group, but we're going to get the word out to the managers who should be here and also to the employees. So it was a good presentation.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear, Barry. And things over in Silverdale are pretty good.
Yes, sir. Getting better.
Good. Okay. Thanks for the feedback.
Absolutely. Thanks, Barry.
And remember, as Sue or Steve said, that this particular item is being recorded and will be out on the website today or tomorrow. So, if you think people need to see it, I'd go ahead and take them through it. It's taken us a little over an hour, but that's because I sometimes run my mouth too long.
That's not a problem.
Hey, Don, this is Steve Bailey.
Yeah.
Let's throw a question out to the group to get a little discussion going here. Somebody out there is sitting on what they consider to be the worst performance appraisal situation that they've either seen or been a part of. Anybody want to share? And you can use an assumed name.
Oh, this is Avis. I've already discussed my worst one. And actually, I was in the situation where I was the manager giving the appraisal. Mm. And the worst part of it, and as I said, the lady eventually, when we had to get rid of her, she actually took us to court. But the worst thing was she got so defensive that no matter what you said, she would just continually counter, and she just absolutely would wear you down if you were not able to, go to your log and give her specific instances. So I really, it was no fun, particularly when it was somebody who was my age, and she kept kept calling me these, you older women. That was great fun, but that was the most difficult one for me to give as a manager. I have to say, in all fairness, since I joined NMA, I have never had to undergo for myself a bad performance review, because time after time after time, when we get to the performance review, my manager would say, well, you must have taken another NMA course. And I'd ask why, and they said, well, you handled this situation this way, and you handled it differently before. So continue to take courses and continue to do good.
That's nice.
And one thing NMA taught me was how to give good performance appraisals. And I coupled that with the Toastmaster performance appraisal, which is the sandwich approach, which is you praise, you give constructive criticism, and you encourage them to continue to develop. And
Thanks,
that's a very succinct way of what Joe and Dawn have been talking about for the last hour and 15 minutes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Avis. Anybody else while we still have a little time? Or Joe or Don, you want to respond to Avis's comment?
Oh, now, Don, you're not at a loss for words.
No, you know that.
Thanks, Chris.
Anything from anybody else?
And it was a very good presentation. Thank you. I will be sending the handouts to my chapters.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, then, Joe and Don, Sue and I and Robin here would like to thank you for a great hour. This is a topic near and dear to everybody. We've all been on either or both ends of performance appraisals. I guess the only thing I have, if you go online, there's a lot of stuff right now. A lot of companies are moving away from the standard performance reviews. Microsoft and Gap have done that. Accenture announced in July that they were getting rid of them. So if you want to go in and Google something, you can Google the push against performance reviews. That's an article in the New Yorker in July, the push against performance reviews.
Oh, another fine technical magazine.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then one I found really amusing was called Why I Hate Performance Reviews.
Yes, that's right. For all the reasons we listed.
That actually came out.
Yeah.
That actually came out last week, August 10th, in the Australian Financial Review.
Yeah.
So anybody wants to do a little extra reading or get a little chuckle, there is a movement there, and I don't know if Don and Joe want to speak to it or not. Organizations going, we need to find something better.
Actually, Steve, I was in a meeting with an HR manager for a large company 2 days ago who said that 6% of Fortune 500 companies are no longer doing performance appraisals, not because they don't have value or merit, but because they can't be done well. And so, the two biggest reasons, if you look at the research, that performance appraisals are not done well is, number one, they have been historically tied to merit pay and compensation. And that's an inappropriate place for the appraisal, because then it becomes a competition, it becomes a test. And the only thing anybody wants to know when they go in is, what kind of percent am I getting out of here?
Yeah.
What's my percent increase, and why didn't I get one? And that's not the point.
No,
and
that's not
the other reason they're moving away from them is that they're tied to some kind of a forced distribution model or fictitious. We have bottom dwellers, we have stellar performance folks, and a lot of managers, I think, adequately equate their worth based on, why would you keep somebody who wasn't performing well just tell them they weren't doing so a year from now? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
And it's funny, I had written down 2 quotes from each article. The New Yorker, the one I liked, it said, a good leader gives constant guidance and makes regular informal assessments of people, which is what you were saying. And then the other one from Why I Hate Performance Reviews, it says, informal conversation and regular feedback have become the new management black.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I can understand why.
Once again, our thanks to Don and to Joe and to everybody who participated. It's a weekend around the corner, so we'd like to wish everyone a great weekend. And the information for next month's webinar is already up on the website. Wow. So you can go check it out. Bob Noel from Boeing in Huntington Beach, California, will be leading what month is this? The September NMA webinar. So good afternoon, good evening, and we'll see you all next time.
Well done, guys.
Yeah, thank you all. We appreciate
Thanks very much.
hanging in there with us.